so Wolfenstein Youngblood.
Yeah.
We got this thing in, and Javy, I believe you turned out a review and beat the game. It felt like the blink of an eye, but how long is this thing?
It took me about 10 hours.
Okay.
Of the main storyline, but it's much bigger than that. Like,
Okay.
it's just like, if you just play through and don't do any of the side mission stuff or the post-game content, and there's a lot of it.
Really?
Yeah, because I think the biggest difference outside of like leaning towards like loot shooter, spongy enemy sort of stuff, which we can talk about later, it's not as bad as it sounds.
Okay.
Is that Arcane co-developed this. So the
That's
creators
right.
of Dishonored co-developed this. And they
Well, it's technically Leon, right? So Dishonored 2's team.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it wasn't, and it's not just like, oh, they did a bunch of grunt work. Like, the previous Wolfensteins are basically like linear from A to Z tunnel kind of setup. And this is more like open world hubs like Dishonored and like Deus Ex.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Paris and Wolfenstein Youngblood isn't, it's not quite as interesting as Karnaka or Dunwall. But for Wolfenstein, it's kind of a big deal. Like just being able to like go to a lot of places and have a lot of free activity. A lot of
open windows where it's like, oh, I can go. I can either go around or I can just climb in the window and come out the other side really quickly.
And it's like chocked to the brim with secrets and upgrades and stuff.
Oh, that's great.
And there are missions, like side missions you can take and go out and do. And it's not just like, oh, a city. There's like also like multiple underground bases to infiltrate beneath the city. And sewers and stuff. It's really big. For
That's
Wolfenstein,
awesome.
It's huge.
All right, a little bit of table setting for folks. Javy, Wolfenstein's one of your favorite series of all time,
is.
yes? You've played through those previous games dozens of times?
Yeah.
Okay, an absurd amount of time. And also table setting, what score did you give Youngblood?
8.5.
8.5. I feel like you were pessimistic about it every other time you've seen it. So what turned you around?
Yeah,
What surprised
it was
you?
a really bad demo.
Oh, okay.
It's probably the worst like demo I've played outside of like Spec Ops: The Line. I remember they released a demo for that, which was stupid. Why would you release a demo for such a story-based game?
Aren't these shooting mechanics cool? Like, not really.
Yeah, the problem with the Wolfenstein demo at E3 that we played is it's just the first level, and I think they hadn't tweaked it yet, so it was just an uphill battle where you have no abilities against spongy enemies, and you're just dying constantly. My partner wasn't that great at the game. And it was just they showed off the worst part of this game. Like, we didn't get to play any of the open world hub area stuff where Arcane's influence goes in. We didn't get to see any of like the really skill tree stuff or the weapon upgrade stuff.
So everything was a pleasant surprise then when you got into the actual game. It's like, oh, this feels open and interesting.
Yeah, and it plays more like, even though like their enemies do have like health bars and levels and stuff, it does play more like traditional Wolfenstein. Like once you get to like the level 5, which you level up so fast in this game. Like I had Serial in my game at one point, and
because
he
it is
leveled
co-op. I guess we haven't fully dual.
Yeah, it's co-op.
But yeah.
And he went from like 5 to level
20.
18 or 20 within the hour that he was playing with me.
Oh,
just
wow.
because you were so much higher level than I was.
Yeah, and but the game like puts you on the same level as like the host.
Yeah.
So he got to reap the benefits without having to deal with that, oh, I'm constantly dying sort of thing that you have to deal with in like the Division or something.
Okay.
Or Destiny, I guess, because the Division does a catch-up mechanic.
Yeah, the first level is kind of a weird, I think, just because it feels like, oh, this is just another Wolfenstein game. And then basically immediately after that, you're kind of thrown into the catacombs, which is your base of operations. And then it becomes like sort of like a loot shooter in that like the structure is that you go around to different quest givers basically and get missions from them. And then you can tackle whatever missions you want at your leisure.
In any order.
Yeah.
And the missions are cool too, because like if you choose to do the side missions, there's basically like 4 big missions that are called raids, but they're not really raids. You just go and you fight a big boss.
They're just like they're more like regular levels.
Like regular Wolfenstein
they're more
levels.
linear.
Okay.
But if you take your time and you do the side missions, you can find shortcuts for those main missions that like, oh, I don't have to storm the front gate. I can sneak in and like basically enter the mission during like the 3rd stage and cut down on time, which is super cool.
And you are going to want to do a lot of those because you do a lot of backtracking in this game where you're running through the same areas over and over again. And so having those shortcuts free up a lot of time that you would otherwise use running like the same exact path over and over again.
Yeah.
And it benefits, like you benefit from exploring a lot more. So I think if you tackle it as like, okay, I get the marker, I'm going to try to, they don't mark like, they don't do the thing where it's like, now you go here, now you go here, now you go here. It's like your destination is 110 meters away and you have to find like what path you're supposed to take to it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So the more shortcuts you have, the easier that is. But if you approach it as like, I'm making a beeline to the objective, you're not going to get as much out of that map as you would otherwise, because a lot of the fun is in finding like those secrets. So if you approach it like a Wolfenstein game where you're just sort of running from A to B, you're probably going to get frustrated of like, oh, I'm running these paths over and over again.
Right.
And you'll also be super underleveled for those fights too, because like those are set levels. You know, like the last boss fight, you should be like level 35 or something.
Dumb question. Did the previous Wolfenstein games have levels?
No.
Okay.
It was just, it played more like Half-Life.
Right.
Yeah, I think
and Halo.
It's weird because like I don't feel like I'm not thinking about levels specifically too much. It's just it feels like it's a relative thing where it's like, okay, this heavily armored guy, he's like 3 levels above you, so like be on your like guard and don't just think he's another fodder enemy. And I think the other cool thing that I actually like, because a lot of this feels like they're trying to make Wolfenstein's gameplay like infinitely repeatable, which isn't what I want out of a Wolfenstein game. Because like the best part of Wolfenstein 2 for me was the story.
Yeah.
So this feels like they're kind of pivoting in a direction that I'm not super interested in. But
in
they
theory
do
for Wolfenstein 3, right? Kind of like
Right.
a test case.
but it's like an improvement, but it's like they're not improving on the things that I want. But I do like the switch to the armor system where different enemies have different kinds of armor, and it's not like super complicated either. They basically have like filled white squares or like hollow white squares, and so you have ammo types that are like, okay, the pistol is like hollow and the shotgun is like full square, and that's really all you have to memorize. So if you're basically matching like, okay, this enemy has this over their health bar, I need to switch to this weapon. So it's like sort of like Destiny's elemental thing where it's like, okay, it's either lightning, void, or solar, but with one less thing to worry about. So it's kind of an interesting thing of like, oh, I can't just use the assault rifle on every enemy I come across. You have to switch it up if you want to be effective.
Yeah.
And that part I think is really cool.
Do you like the game overall, Sergio?
I like the game overall. Like I do sort of miss the emphasis on story. Like so far I've seen like maybe that first mission feels like it's super heavy on the story relative to the rest of the game. It feels like, I don't know, JV, you've beaten the game, so it feels like.
Yeah, expect like no story no story that you're actually interested in between like the beginning and end, basically. Like the meat of the game is that's like the one thing I'm not necessarily in love with, but I also don't mind it at the same time because I know this isn't Wolfenstein 3. This is a side chapter.
Right. It's a confusing thing where it's a side chapter, but it's also how many years in the future?
It's 20 years in the future, and I don't want to get too into it, but the game's ending does sort of like touch on that in a way that's interesting.
That constrains Wolfenstein 3 or opens up the potential for Wolfenstein 3?
Opens up the potential for.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, like, I mean, we know Wolfenstein 3's coming. Like, Bethesda has said so.
Have they said whether or not whether this takes place, like, have they confirmed, like, this takes place after Wolfenstein 3, or they haven't said anything?
They have not said anything at all, and the thing that happens in the game muddies that even more.
So it could take place after this, potentially. Like, Wolfenstein 3 could take place after this game.
It could take place. Wolfenstein 3 could take place after, before this, or at both. Like in a Godfather 2 kind of setup with what they have. And I won't go too into it, but it's super interesting.
Sure. What are you rooting for at this point?
I think they it's really hard to like say anything without like spoiling stuff, but I really like the Godfather 2 path of like having the best of both worlds of like, here's some old Wolfenstein, here's some new Wolfenstein.
Right.
Yeah.
It's weird because like I'm kind of interested in like, you know, the whole premise is that BJ is missing, right? And at this point he'd be like a pretty old guy.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting because like I feel like part of the premise of 2 was my body is deteriorating. Like I don't like, and he so it's like, oh, I'm running out of time. So it feels like to have that premise again in the third one where it's like, oh, now I'm just really old.
I did run out of time.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what I'm assuming. But yeah, it's interesting. It ends on an interesting note, and I think that's why it keeps it from being like a total story bummer for me. It's like there are interesting like breadcrumbs there. You know, it doesn't really like. I was worried that they would spoil a whole lot of like what happened in the years between like 2 and Youngblood, but it really doesn't. Like, I don't really have a clear idea of what happened to most of the cast. I don't really know the specifics of what happened.
And in a weird way, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It's like the difference between like, you know, when you see like the original Star Wars trilogy and they like talk about all these vague things that happened in the prequels, but they don't really like, you don't really know what happened in the prequels.
The Clone Wars, I guess, sound cool.
Yeah, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah. How are the daughters?
They're goofballs and they don't really have like a character arc. They're likable. They're like, especially if like you got tired of BJ sort of like doing his melancholy, weird beatnik poetry stream of consciousness.
They're super
thing.
excitable. comparatively to.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're huge dorks and cornballs and generally likable, but they don't grow as people.
So they're dorks who love killing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like Soph is like very broy. She has like a little bit of a draw. She's constantly like, oh yeah, and then versus like Jess, who feels like I've just started calling her Violent Velma.
Yeah.
Where she's a little bit more nerdy, but they have this like really interesting shtick where I guess they read like Kenneth and Arthur novels, which are like a thing in their world, and so they just refer to each other as Kenneth and Arthur, and they do bits for like impersonating those characters.
Oh, somebody upset that you have to play as a woman. You're kind of playing as a Kenneth and Arthur. So.
Yeah, that's right.
All
And,
right.
but they're like really like these characters are really like posh British people. So they'll do these like accents basically as you're playing around with them. And so they're palling around and quipping as you're playing the game. And that's the most story I've gotten so far.
Yeah.
And that feels like, yeah, that's fun enough. I guess.
It's basically like the whole tone of the game to me is Nancy Drew Nazi Killer. Is like if you had to describe Youngblood as like what is this whole vibe of this game? That's what it is.
So it's like a mystery?
A little parts of it, but it's
Okay.
mostly like just like, you know, a bunch of teenage women killing a bunch of people and but having a happy-go-lucky time while doing it.
This might be a spoiler, so don't answer it if it is.
Okay.
Is Mecha Hitler in this game?
I think I can answer that out of the gate because they've revealed content about this, but no, Mecha Hitler is not in this game.
But there are a lot of mecha Nazis and
There are a lot of
that.
mecha. There's a lot of mecha.
Yeah.
a lot of mecha.
There's a lot of mecha.
Okay, great. Everyone's coming for the mecha.
Yeah.
All right, that
Yeah.
seems fun. Like enemies you're fighting, anything really interesting there?
Yeah, there is a lot more variety to enemies than even in like the new Colossus, which I felt did a pretty good job of like adding more enemies. Because in the new order, there were like 3 enemies, infantry enemies that you fought, in addition to like 2 robots. You didn't really fight like a lot of variety, but here you've got like all kinds of Nazis. You've got silent assassin Nazis with like who just sneak around. You got flamethrower Nazis. You got meta. What is the word?
The Terminator
Nazis.
robots?
No. Yes, Nazis. The medics. You got medic Nazis that will like heal other Nazis. So you know, it's a lot of Nazis. A lot of enemies.
Yeah,
to
there
go.
are basically
Alright.
robots that look like Terminator robots. And
Oh, really?
Yeah, there are robot dogs with bombs strapped to their chests.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and like the towering robot nightmare from New Colossus, which is huge. Returns, and you have to fight that quite a bit. Yeah,
That seems fun.
So there's a lot of enemy types.
So if you like the gameplay of New Colossus, this is sort of like, hey, here's a bunch more of that with some improvements. But if you're coming for the story, it's a side story, so don't have huge expectations on that front.
I also think like it's a weird thing because I don't want to say it's like a good entry point, but also at the same time, like if you grew up and you really liked playing Halo co-op, you know, like doing those campaigns with a friend, and you've missed that sort of experience.
Yeah, totally.
This is a pretty good analog to that. Like
And you won't be too confused.
yeah, and you know, like, oh, this thing happened. Okay, got it. And then you might get interested in the story and want to go back and like play games, but like you could come to this with generally like nothing beyond the idea of like Wolfenstein is a game about killing Nazis.
How much is this thing?
It's like, well, the standard edition is $29.99, but there's also like a $39 edition, the deluxe edition, where you get an extra copy of the game that you can give to someone that they can only play when they're playing with you, but you can also give that copy to that same copy to someone else down the road. So like, let's say like I buy this version of the game, I give you like the buddy pass version, we play through it together, we finish it. You're never going to play it again. I can give that buddy pass to someone else.
That's confusing.
Yeah,
That's a tough thing to message.
It's basically a way to play co-op with anyone, regardless of whether or not they have a copy.
Right. That's interesting. That seems cool.
I'm really interested to see how it turns out in the wild.
Yeah, for sure. And is it on Switch?
Yeah, it's on Switch.
Like day one on Switch?
Day one.
Wow. Did you play that version at all?
No.
Okay.
That's the one I'm going to buy to play with my partner. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
Oh, boy. Would you play?
Like the Wolfenstein 2 port was actually really good. Like I was dreading that, but it was better. It was a better port than like the Doom port was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they got most of it right. As long as you didn't look too closely at characters' faces, it was a good time.
Yeah, play in a handheld mode and keep it far away.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, all right, that seems good.
Yeah.
Cool. Youngblood. Hey, they did it. Congratulations. There we go.
Yeah, it's a good game.
That was just a clip from a larger show called The Game Informer Show. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or GameInformer.com. We take the fun opportunities and exclusive information from Game Informer magazine and boil it into a show that airs every Thursday with exclusive cover story information, developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So come love games with us.